Welcome once again to another episode of What Happened, the show where we 24/7, 365. But no one is better at taking their fans for a ride than Capcom, the seminal Japanese publisher/developer who's probably responsible for everything you've ever liked about video games. However, that ride has undoubtedly had some peaks and valleys along the way, as some of those Capcom franchises or characters that you fell in love with have since been blipped from history. Nowadays, though, if you're into Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, or Phoenix Wright, you have it pretty good in all honesty, but there's one fan base that have it not so pretty good, and those are the ones that maybe supported Capcom the most, and that's the PN09 fans. Fighting game fans. The last several years have been kind of very rough for a variety of reasons, be it lukewarm launches, poor communication, or iffy DLC practices. But while Street Fighter V more or less managed to turn itself around, Capcom's only other fighting game of this generation, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, has to be one of, if not the biggest failure in the realm of fisticuffing. Yeah, you hear that, Cross-Tekken? You're off the hook! Yeah, we knew you could do it.
Whoa, slow down there. Did you really think you were gonna hog this subject all to yourself?
Why, if it isn't Guinness Book of World Records winner for most subscribed channel that specializes in fighting games, Maximilian, dude. Hey there.
Hello, Matthew.
Stop calling me that. Anyway, with Max's help, we're gonna be tag teaming to break down the long, tragic journey of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. So, without further ado,
let's go!
So, grab your time stone and let's travel back to one of the most glorious years in all of the years, 1994. The world was fertile and vibrant, and blessed with many natural wonders such as Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies, Ace of Base, Donkey Kong Country.
But that's all garbage. Why? Because X-Men Children of the Atom. That's why. This absolute magnum dick of a fighting game set a new standard for graphics and gameplay in the arcades, as it took full advantage of Capcom's CPS2 board. It also set an exciting precedent for fans of comics or video games in general.
Oh, if Capcom is making Marvel games, what if both sides clash in an epic struggle? What if Ryu could Dragon Punch Cyclops? What if Zangief could pile drive Cyclops? And what if M. Bison could kill Cyclops? Unfortunately, those questions would go unanswered for about 2 years, because then X-Men vs. Street Fighter was released.
Thus kicked off half a decade of amazing, manic, over-the-top, combative fanboying between two pop culture powerhouses. This culminated in 2000 as it saw Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes released, which really cemented the legacy of Capcom vs. Fighters, clocking in at 56 goddamn characters, upping the teams to an insane 3 vs. 3, and introducing my personal favorite, the sexy seductress, Amingo. Marvel 2 established itself as an absolute classic. Things only got more hype from there, as the unbalanced but nevertheless fun and deep gameplay exploded in popularity just 2 years later, as it was heavily featured in the early EVOs, becoming a pillar of the fighting game community.
Then for a long time, nothing happened. During these dark ages, fighting games, particularly 2D ones, struggled to find relevance in a marketplace filled with games like Virtua Fighter 4, Dead or Alive 3, and of course, the king of them all, Mortal Kombat Deception. Then, in 2008, Capcom returned to the arena with Street Fighter 4, which proved to be a sales success, and felt they needed to capitalize on this fighting game renaissance while it was hot, and what better follow-up than clashing once again with the Marvel Universe. Things had changed since the late 90s, however, and rather than being almost out of business, business was a-boomin', and a whole heap of Marvel heroes now had maximum mainstream exposure. We're talking about guys like Iron Money, Hot God, and Captain Duty, and since his movie was in the works at that time, they threw in Sassy Doctor as well.
Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds released in 2011, with one of the worst logos ever, and longtime fans lost their collective shit. The game featured a bold comic book art style, had a great balance of fan favorites and newcomers, and was generally really fun to play. A lot of skeptics, however, assumed Capcom would just put out a better version a few months later, which they did. But hey, Ultimate Marvel 3 had some awesome new additions and was seen as a superior iteration collection. With that being said, the game definitely needed some balance changes, but official support had dried up and Capcom wasn't talking. The next time Marvel 3 was mentioned was when it was delisted from all digital services in late 2013. In fact, this even kicked off lots of Marvel franchises, disappearing from the Digiverse, including Marvel Origins Collection and its terrible, terrible box art. This move to start regaining their franchises that they had licensed out to companies that were now smaller than them and infinitesimal next to Disney is a behavior that would be intrinsically linked to Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite's eventual fate.
In December of 2016, Capcom announced a new game in the series at PSX. What's PSX, you ask? Well, it was a big PlayStation-themed show that Sony just stopped doing. Now, this was a bit odd. Why didn't Capcom show it at E3 or EVO? PSX wasn't exactly the biggest venue to show off a brand new fighting game, especially one that was multi-platform, so why not just wait until E3?
No, there's something else. Something ugly. Something malignant.
Regardless, people were excited because the MCU was now, doing pretty good. But hardcore Marvel players were a bit more subdued. Infinite reverted back to the 2v2 setup of its roots, and Infinity Stones were added to the main gameplay loop, which would be the replacement for that third character. While it was nice that Capcom were shaking things up, some people thought they detected the memorable stench of gems from Cross Tekken, which would thankfully not be the case. One thing, however, that definitely was the case was the suspicious roster. Now, some people were pretty enthusiastic about X's inclusion.
Yo! Fuck you! Oh my god, what the fuck?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Others felt it was a bit worrisome that there was nary a whiff of a mutant. The months ticked by and it was quiet on all fronts until E3 2017, where Infinite had its first proper unveiling. The story mode was highlighted in a new shiny trailer, and it probably shouldn't have. Oh cool, there's Thanos, and there's Frank West at the Rocket, and oh my god.
What would you do if I sang out of tune?
Now, we don't want to harp on this, but it can't be overstated how Chun-Li's creepy porcelain baby face stuffed in a sausage casing permanently damaged the fan perception of Marvel from then on out. No one on the greater internet was talking about the gameplay, the Infinity Stones, or the story itself because...
Just take a look at this!
Also, get a load of Captain Duty. Woof. So, why did certain characters like Monster Mash over here look like Monster Mash over here? Conversely, why the new fighters look pretty sharp? Well, there's a good reason for that, or a bad reason, really. Because the developmental details of a lot of Capcom projects, especially those tied up by a bunch of NDA psych-locks, aren't really privy to the public. Thankfully though, almost 2 years since its debut, enough pieces of the puzzle have been put together and enough lips have gotten ever so looser.
Close to the launch of the game, some staff within Capcom, under anonymity, revealed that the budget for Infinite wasn't exactly high, with one quote putting it succinctly by describing it as cheap as shit. While exact numbers are not known, Marvel's entire budget for the base game was comparable to just one season of DLC for Street Fighter V. Now, Capcom's flagship fighter did have additional backing by Sony, but seemingly no such deal was put into place for Infinite. Thus, it's safe to assume Capcom was funding most of it, if not all of the game, by themselves, and they weren't exactly splurging on it.
Now, how do you cut costs in a fighting game?
Well, you just do what you do in the old days. See?
Okay, so let's compare, say, Venom and Dante. Notice the distinct drops in quality here, and here? Well, that's because they just grabbed Dante's model or his animations from Marvel 3, a game with a very different art style, and just plopped them into Infinite. Do that a few dozen times and you have your roster. What's more is that both games ran on vastly different engines, as Capcom's proprietary MT framework, which they have since abandoned, powered the comic book contrast in Marvel 3, whereas Infinite used Unreal 4, which powers just about every other fighting game nowadays. This might have caused some awkwardness.
Look!
Speaking of art styles, many fans pointed out Infinite's lack of one. Maybe Capcom didn't want this to be seen as a mere upgrade to Marvel 3, so a softer, more semi-realistic look was chosen instead. It was pretty apparent that most of the models looked rushed and sorta cheap, while the new fighters had a considerably more polished look. According to anonymous Capcom staff, these issues were raised to the higher-ups who were producing the game. The concerns, however, were apparently waved off, citing that it was a non-issue as no one would notice.
Yeah, well, I want it on record that this is a bad idea.
Now, while this has a modicum of truth to it, as all the frantic action and screen-filling special moves would make it nigh impossible to discern such detail, but that doesn't hold true if you say then zoom in on the Crypt Keeper during your story mode trailer.
Not content with just that, Capcom released a downloadable demo for said story mode that same E3 weekend to spread positive word of mouth about the game.
So, what the hell happened?
It didn't. Now, it might have been a good idea on paper, but this demo could have possibly done more harm than good. There was no versus component of any kind, no training, and was compromised of just a few limp fights against computer-controlled drones. That was it. Even as a product promoting a story mode, it did little to excite, and also prevented people from really experimenting with the gameplay, Infinite's best feature. That was the one thing people were actually pumped about, as everyone playing Versus on the E3 show floor were having a blast. But the majority of fans sitting at home were getting a vastly different experience.
One more thing that happened during E3 2017 that, in conjunction with all the other bad press, formed a type of icky paste that just gooped onto Marvel Infinite and never let go. That, of course, being Bandai Namco and Arc System Works literally announcing another fighting franchise that had a dynamic art style, 3 vs 3 tag matches, and featured legendary characters known the world over. You can't do nothing about that. While competition is a good thing and it should strive to push two products to be better, it didn't really pan out that way. More on that later. Oh wait, more on that now. Simply put, Marvel's chances at making some type of impact were dunked into a coffin from outer space by Android 16 and then nuked. Everything Infinite lacked, fighters had, and more. Not to mention, Namco scheduled the first public beta for DBZ the exact same weekend as Marvel's launch.
Convenient.
Intentional or not, in the FGC at least, this was seen as the darkest of shades. The memes and shitposting came sliding in hot and wet across social media, so the public opinion again was a bit skewed.
Then, fortunately, actually things got even worse. Speculation over the lack of X-Men or Fantastic Four characters was no longer unfounded, but was in fact very much found. Near the end of 2017, Marvel put all X-Men books on hiatus as they were embroiled with the disputes from 20th Century Fox over the characters. Then they relaunched X-Men later that year, but the Fantastic Four? They had been in the crap shack since 2014, as Marvel had been devaluing the brand, so Fox would just give up and relinquish the rights. And we could, get good Fantastic Four movies for once. This was ruthless, by the way. Marvel was scrubbing them off any media they could. Hell, the Fantastic Four logo was even taken off Bombastic Bagman's bag in Spider-Man Unlimited.
She even took the ice cube trays out of the freezer. What kind of a sick bitch takes the ice cube trays out of the freezer?
Pettiness like that goes all the way back to Marvel 3, as the producer of that title, one Ryota Nitsuma, admitted they weren't the easiest company to work with, and cited a specific example where they would stall development, agonizing over the details of Doctor Strange's hand movements. Other anonymous Capcom staff also stated whenever they would request the use of certain characters, they would often get rebuffed from Marvel if they had no plans to use them within the MCU. One such instance was with the goddamn Juggernaut and his very, very tight suit. Capcom wanted the big jugs to return, but Marvel had no interest in pushing him, and in fact, Capcom were the ones who fought for characters like X-23 and Deadpool to be included in Fate of Two Worlds, and Only after sustained campaigning for them would Marvel relent. Capcom tried their best to gather the most interesting heroes and villains they could, but if you have a partner who's difficult or unwilling to play ball, there's not much you can do. Therefore, Infinite would have no Sentinel, Magneto, Doctor Doom, or etc., and despite them usually being at odds with each other, both the FGC and casual audience came together to hate this as a united people. Capcom obviously couldn't go with the whole "it's Marvel's fault" route, so instead they went with the whole "characters are just functions" approach.
Then, producer of Capcom's fighting games Peter Combofin Rosas famously said in an interview, "If you were to actually think about it, these characters are just functions. They're just doing things. Magneto, case in point, is a favorite because he has 8-way air dash and he's really fast, right? Well, guess what? Nova can do the same thing. Captain Marvel can do the same thing. It's just a function that people are associating with the character, and there's no shortage of that. We wanted to make sure that if a legacy of characters doesn't happen to make the roster this time, that playstyle would still be represented." The quote did certainly rub a lot of people the wrong way, but Combo Fiend couldn't exactly throw Marvel under the bus over this, so he had to take some tact when these issues came up and present to you some tact. Looking back on it, this is literally the only thing he could have said, so as to keep the heat off any one group. And I'd imagine if he had been even 1% more provocative in his answer, Disney would make sure there would be a severed Beta Ray Bill head under his sheets that night.
Infinite launched on September 19th, 2017, less than a year since its reveal, and a few months shy of releasing alongside one of the biggest movie events of all time, Avengers: Infinity War. Not the most synergistic time frame from a marketing perspective. One of the biggest advantages of a crossover title like this, a colorful cast of characters and a fantastical storyline, wasn't really being used to its full potential. Why they didn't wait a few more months to be closer to the hype of Infinity War is a journey into mystery itself, and considering the state of the game, more time in development wouldn't have hurt it. So, with this negative perception circulating around the game, what with its lack of an exciting roster and more enticing alternatives on the horizon, it's no surprise that all these foibles masked Infinite's best quality, its gameplay. Very quickly, people realized the Infinity Stone system didn't hurt Marvel, but only strengthened it. It functioned more like the grooves in earlier Capcom titles and led to lots of creativity and combo potential. Characters from Marvel 3, aside from their looks, got some fun changes, and the new cast received similar praise as well. Most reviews took these positives into account, claiming that the core game was really enjoyable. However, the ho-hum graphics, the lifeless stages, the stunted roster, drab menus and presentation, and the mediocre story mode were not enough to balance everything out.
Then, within days of launching, Capcom announced that a lineup of DLC characters were coming soon. Suspiciously soon. The 6 fighters would include Black Panther, Venom, Monster Hunter, and the rest. And while not known at the time, it has since been revealed that all 6 were originally scheduled to be in the starting lineup. Producers on the project felt it would be better to cut them from launch and make them DLC, as they didn't even have a long-term roadmap for future content.
Yeah, because that always works out great.
Or if they did, had scrapped it. This is partially evidenced by both Monster Hunter and Black Panther appearing within the story mode, with the latter also getting their own Wakandan-themed stage. The first 3 were added 30 days after the game launched, and all 6 were made available in less than 3 months, which also marked the last bit of content the game would ever receive.
Also, Filipino Champ let the world know that there was originally going to be maybe 61 characters and 18 stages, but aside from that, I think we've covered the cavalcade of bad decisions and worst timing that plagued Marvel Infinite, one of the biggest fighting game disasters.
But what about Evo?
Right, okay, now it's time to talk about this. Not only did Infinite's September release put it far away from Avengers hype, it also missed out on EVO 2017 as well. Marvel would have to survive a good 6 months to hopefully get picked for next year's championship series. During said announcement stream of the lineup, Mr. Wizard listed the games that would make the main stage, and Infinite was not among them, although 2 other tag-focused games, DBZ Fighters and Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle Ruby Thing, did. Mr. Wizard stated this was due to lack of participation from the community, as well as low stream numbers during other tournaments. Many people felt this was unfair, as Marvel's numbers in those areas were not bad by any stretch and rivaled or surpassed other games, especially Cross Tag Battle, whose numbers were 0, since it wasn't even released when the EVO announcement was made. What's more is that this was the first time in 16 years that a Marvel vs. fighting game would have no main stage presence.
After the livestream, Markman, another EVO representative and stick god, made comments that inferred Infinite's exclusion was not due to Capcom or even EVO themselves, saying, "I go to many FGC events, probably the most outside of sponsored players. I know that MVCI is being played, but it's hard to include a game that doesn't have support. I'm not talking about Capcom because they've supported it the most. We've had meetings with some pubs and devs about including their title as a main game at EVO. You know what? We didn't get the blessing that we hope for sometimes. We actively have to seek permission and/or content licenses to be able to include certain games."
Why exactly did this happen? Well, while not confirmed, internally, Infinite was seen as a failure due to the online backlash, the reaction to the roster, the reviews, take your pick.
But we were exposed.
So, since the perception of Marvel was so poor, trying to improve it with more DLC, or graphical adjustments, or even an ultimate version was felt as a waste of money, which no company wants to do. Instead, it would simply be better to wash their hands of the whole thing and just move on. Hell, Marvel was already doing that with Fantastic Four by just ignoring their existence, so why not do the same here? The last patch that the game received that fixed a few bugs was in January of 2018, so that was 5 months of official support and then just nothing. Like, Cross-fucking Tekken had a better shelf life than that, for shock's sake.
It was at EVO! Fortunately though, Infinite did make up for all this failure by at least selling what Capcom projected, which was about 2 million copies in the first fiscal time stone. Failed to sell 2 million copies, and instead barely sold half of Capcom's projections. This was less than Marvel 3 had managed to move 6 years earlier, by the way, and since the MCU brand was more popular than Jesus, well, that ain't good.
We are now almost 2 years away from Infinite's launch, and things are different. Disney now owns 20th Century Fox, so the X-Men and the Fantastic Four are back in the fold, all the comics are getting relaunched, and just look at the cover of Ultimate Alliance 3. It involves Thanos and the gems, and goddamn Wolverine is front and center, slapping you with his hairy adamantium dong. There's even gonna be a DLC pack for the Fantastic Four. Oh, man.
Listen, it's pretty clear that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite got dealt a bad hand. The timing, the competition, the budget, everything was working against it. And many of those elements were simply out of Capcom's hands.
Every so often, though, rumors pop up of the game returning in some form, or a full-fledged sequel might even be in the works, but unfortunately, there's no concrete evidence to support that. But still, it makes you think, what if?
My spider sense. I'm picking up nothing.
Thanks so much to my marvelous tag partner Max for the team up.
Hey, no problem, Matt. My name is Max, and I'll see you next time.
And thanks to all you Flophouse VIPers for voting strong and proud and saying, "When's Marvel?" And if you out there, true believers, know of any other games, fighting or otherwise, you'd like to see on What Happened, punch up your comments below or web-swing your way to the Flophouse VIP Patreon to officially cast your vote on our next video. And that is 'nuff said.